Marcus Cole was tired, hungry, and covered in engine grease when he stepped onto the public terrace of Vareth Prime Station. The kind of tired that sinks into your bones and makes every step feel like walking through mud. And the kind of hungry that turns a simple meal into the most important mission in the galaxy. He had spent the last 14 hours buried inside a faulty plasma conduit, his arms scraped raw from crawling through maintenance shafts that were clearly designed for species much smaller than humans. The pay had been decent enough to afford a real meal instead of nutrient paste, and that was all that mattered to a fringe colony mechanic with empty pockets and an emptier stomach. The terrace was beautiful in a way that made Marcus feel out of place. Crystal domes arched overhead like frozen waves, and beyond them stretched the endless purple swirl of the Kethany Nebula, its colors shifting and dancing in patterns that no human artist could ever capture. And all around him moved beings of 100 different species, their clothing worth more than everything Marcus had ever owned combined. He searched for an empty seat with growing desperation. Every table seemed occupied by diplomats in flowing robes or merchants, displaying their wealth through elaborate jewelry and hovering service drones. And the few empty chairs he spotted were quickly claimed by others, who moved with the confidence of people who belonged in places like this. Then he saw it, a table near the viewport with the best view on the entire terrace, and only one person sitting there, a figure in pale silver robes, alone in a hover chair that hummed softly with advanced technology Marcus could not even begin to understand. He walked over without hesitation because his feet hurt and his stomach was growling, and the view of the nebula was calling to him like a song. He pulled out the chair across from the silent figure and sat down with a heavy sigh of relief that came from somewhere deep in his exhausted soul. "Mind if I sit here?" he asked, already seated and already reaching for the menu display. "Everywhere else is packed, and I have been working for 14 hours straight, and I might actually collapse if I do not eat something soon." The figure across from him did not respond. She was Verati, he realized, with pale lavender skin that seemed to glow faintly in the nebula light, and silver hair that cascaded past slender shoulders like a waterfall of starlight, and 4 eyes that stared at nothing in particular with an emptiness that Marcus mistook for meditation or perhaps just a desire to be left alone. Her hands lay motionless in her lap, delicate fingers curled slightly inward, and her hover chair was more advanced than any medical equipment Marcus had ever seen, with soft cushions that seemed to adjust themselves constantly and monitoring devices that blinked with quiet purpose. "Silent type, huh?" Marcus said with a small smile as the service drone took his order. "That is fine by me. I talk enough for 2 people anyway, or so my crew keeps telling me before they throw wrenches at my head." He ordered the cheapest protein dish on the menu and a glass of water, because even a decent paycheck only stretched so far on a station, where everything cost 10 times what it should. While he waited, he found himself talking to fill the silence the way humans always do when quiet feels too heavy. "Beautiful view," he said, gesturing toward the nebula with a grease-stained hand. "Back on Earth, we do not have anything like this. We have stars and the moon and sunsets that can make you cry if you catch them at the right moment. But nothing that moves like that. Nothing that feels alive the way that nebula does." The Verati woman did not move. Her 4 eyes remained fixed on some distant point, and her breathing was so shallow that Marcus almost wondered if she was breathing at all. "I am from the fringe colonies originally," he continued, warming to his subject the way lonely people do when they finally have someone to talk at. "A little mining settlement called New Providence, which is a fancy name for a bunch of prefab buildings and too much dust. But it was home, and I miss it sometimes when I am out here in the black." His food arrived, and he ate with the enthusiasm of a man who had earned every bite. Between mouthfuls, he kept talking, telling her about his ship and its temperamental engine, about the plasma conduit that had nearly electrocuted him twice, about his crewmate Yara, who made the best coffee in 3 systems using a method that probably violated several health codes. She does something with the filtration system, Marcus explained, waving his fork for emphasis. I do not ask questions because the coffee is too good, and some mysteries are better left unsolved. He did not notice the subtle shift in the woman's breathing. He did not see the way her 4 eyes moved almost imperceptibly, tracking his gestures with desperate hunger. He did not understand that behind that frozen face was a mind that had been screaming in isolation for 11 long years, and that his simple human kindness was the first warmth she had felt since the neural plague had stolen her body. You know what I miss most about Earth? He asked, not expecting an answer and not needing one. The rain. I know that sounds silly, because rain is just water falling from the sky and getting you wet and making everything muddy. But there is something about the smell of it, the way it sounds on a roof, the way it makes everything feel clean and new. He leaned back in his chair and looked at the nebula, and for a moment his homesickness showed on his face like a wound. I've been out here for 6 years now, and I still dream about standing in the rain with my face turned up to the sky, just letting it wash over me. The woman he was talking to was Princess Salith Verkan, only daughter of the Varati Emperor, whose neural plague had made headlines across 12 systems, and whose frozen silence had become a symbol of tragedy in a civilization that communicated through the smallest movements. She had not spoken or moved voluntarily in over a decade, and the finest physicians in the Ascendancy had declared her condition permanent. But Marcus did not know any of this. He only saw a lonely figure at an empty table, and he did what humans have always done. He reached out with words and warmth, and the simple gift of treating a stranger like a friend. And somewhere deep inside her frozen prison, Princess Salith felt something she had forgotten existed: hope. The guards came for Marcus before he had finished his meal. 4 of them in ceremonial armor that gleamed like black mirrors, their faces hidden behind visors that displayed scrolling symbols in a language he could not read, and their weapons humming with the kind of energy that made his teeth ache. Human, one of them said through a translator that stripped all emotion from the words. You will come with us immediately. Resistance will result in termination. Marcus dropped his fork and raised his hand slowly because he had learned long ago that arguing with armed guards was a quick way to end up dead. Okay. Can someone at least tell me what I did wrong? They did not answer. They simply clamped restraints around his wrists and marched him away from the terrace, while dozens of species watched with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. And Marcus felt his stomach drop as he realized that whatever he had done, it was serious enough to warrant this kind of response. The imperial wing of the station was nothing like the public areas. Here the walls were black marble veined with gold, and holographic artwork shifted and moved in patterns that seemed to follow Marcus as he walked. And the air itself felt heavier, charged with power and ancient tradition. They brought him to a chamber that was clearly designed to intimidate. A vast circular room with a ceiling so high it disappeared into shadow. And at its center stood a throne of living crystal that pulsed with inner light. And upon that throne sat the most terrifying being Marcus had ever seen. Emperor Kale Verkan was 7 feet of cold fury wrapped in robes that seemed to be woven from starlight itself. His 4 eyes burned with an intensity that made Marcus want to crawl into a corner and hide. And when he spoke, his voice resonated through the chamber like thunder rolling across mountains. Human, the Emperor said, and the word dripped with disgust. Do you understand what you have done? Marcus swallowed hard and tried to keep his voice steady. With respect, Your Majesty, I genuinely have no idea. I just sat down at a table and had dinner. The Emperor rose from his throne and descended the steps with the fluid grace of a predator. You touched the presence field of my daughter. You spoke to her for 43 minutes without invitation, without permission, without any understanding of what your actions meant. Your daughter? Marcus felt the blood drain from his face as understanding began to dawn. The woman in the hover chair? That was a princess? She is Princess Salith Vakan, the Emperor said, and his voice cracked slightly on her name. The last of my bloodline, the heir to the ascendancy, and a victim of the neural plague that has stolen everything from her, except her life. Marcus thought about the silent woman with the empty eyes, and suddenly her stillness made terrible sense. I did not know. I swear on everything I have ever loved, I did not know who she was or what had happened to her. Ignorance is not a defense, the Emperor replied coldly. In Varadi culture, to sit uninvited at someone's table is a declaration of either courtship or war. You have committed an offense that carries the penalty of death. The word hit Marcus like a physical blow, and he felt his knees weaken. He was going to die because he had been tired and hungry and had chosen the wrong seat, and there was nothing he could say that would change that fact. I just thought she looked lonely, he said quietly, because if these were his last words, then he wanted them to be true. I know that sounds stupid and I know it does not matter to you, but she was sitting there all by herself, and something about it felt wrong. Everyone else had someone to talk to, and she had no one. The Emperor paused, and something flickered in his 4 eyes that might have been pain. Lonely? He repeated the word as if it were foreign to him. She is the most protected being in 12 systems. She is surrounded by physicians and servants and the finest minds of the ascendancy every moment of every day. With respect, Your Majesty, Marcus said, finding courage in the certainty of his death. Those are not the same thing. You can be surrounded by 1,000 people and still be completely alone, if none of them see you as a person. The chamber fell silent. The guards shifted uncomfortably, and the Emperor stared at Marcus with an expression that was impossible to read. Then a door opened, and a Varadi in physician's robes hurried in, clutching a datapad and wearing an expression of barely contained excitement. Sire, forgive the interruption, but you must see this immediately. It concerns the princess. The Emperor turned sharply. What has happened? Is she harmed? No, sire, something else entirely. The physician thrust the datapad forward with trembling hands. During the human's interaction with Princess Selith, we detected neural activity unlike anything we have recorded in 11 years. Marcus watched as the Emperor took the datapad and studied it, and he saw something change in the ancient ruler's face. The cold fury melted away and was replaced by something raw and vulnerable, something that looked almost like hope. Her pleasure centers, the Emperor whispered. Her engagement centers, they responded. Yes, sire. The physician was practically vibrating with excitement. For 43 minutes, her brain showed patterns consistent with enjoyment, with interest, with emotional connection. We have tried everything for over a decade and nothing has worked. But this human did something that reached her. The Emperor looked at Marcus with new eyes, and the mechanic felt the weight of that gaze pressing down on him like a physical force. What did you do? The Emperor demanded. What method did you use? Marcus blinked in confusion. I did not use any method. I just talked to her like I would talk to anyone. I told her about my ship and my home and the rain on Earth and my crewmate's terrible coffee addiction. You talked to her, the Emperor repeated slowly, as if the concept were alien to him. You simply talked to her as if she were a normal person? She is a normal person, Marcus said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. Just because her body does not work does not mean she stopped being a person. I figured she could probably hear me even if she could not respond, and nobody deserves to be ignored. The Emperor was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was different, softer, broken in places. In 11 years, not one of us thought to simply talk to her. We discussed her condition in front of her. We analyzed her like a specimen. We treated her like a problem to be solved rather than a daughter to be loved. He looked at Marcus, and for the first time, the mechanic saw the father beneath the Emperor. "You may have given me something priceless, human. You may have given me my daughter back." The princess's private medical chambers were nothing like Marcus had expected. He had imagined warmth and comfort, but instead, he found sterile white walls and humming machines, and an atmosphere so clinical it made his skin crawl. And at the center of it all sat Salith in her hover chair, surrounded by technology but utterly alone. The Emperor's orders had been unprecedented. The human mechanic would be granted supervised access to the princess, his interactions monitored and analyzed by a team of physicians who watched from behind observation, screens with expressions that ranged from skeptical to openly hostile. "They do not like me very much," Marcus said to Salith as he pulled up a chair beside her. "I am guessing a grease-covered human from the fringe colonies is not exactly what they had in mind when they imagined someone helping their princess." She did not respond, of course. Her 4 eyes remained fixed on that distant point, and her body was as still as a statue carved from lavender stone. But Marcus had stopped expecting responses days ago. He talked to her because he believed she could hear him, and that was enough. "I brought something to show you," he said, pulling out a small hollow projector he had cobbled together from spare parts and questionable wiring. "It is not fancy like the stuff they have here, but it works, and I thought you might like to see where I come from." He activated the projector and a tiny Earth appeared above his palm, rotating slowly in the artificial light. Oceans of blue and continents of green, and swirls of white clouds that moved in patterns as old as time itself. "That is home," Marcus said softly. "Third planet from a yellow star in a galaxy so far from here that the light from it will not reach this station for thousands of years. I know it does not look like much compared to the Ascendancy, but it is ours and we love it." He zoomed in on a stretch of coastline where waves crashed against rocky shores. "I grew up near an ocean. Did you know that Earth is mostly water? And that we evolved from creatures that crawled out of those waters millions of years ago? And that sometimes when I stand at the edge of the sea, I can almost feel that ancient connection in my bones?" Behind the observation glass, the physicians were taking notes with frantic intensity. They could see Salith's neural activity spiking on their monitors, responding to the human's words in ways they had never achieved with their advanced treatments and sophisticated therapies. "The thing I miss most is the rain," Marcus continued, and the projector showed clouds forming over mountains, drops falling in silver sheets. "On Earth, water falls from the sky, and it sounds like music on a roof, and it smells like something I cannot describe. Fresh and clean and full of promise, like the world is washing itself and starting over." He talked for hours. He told her about his mother, who had died when he was young but who had taught him that every machine had a soul if you listened closely enough. He told her about his first ship, a rusted freighter that broke down more often than it flew, but that had carried him to the stars. He told her about the friends he had made and lost, the planets he had visited, the wonders he had seen. And then he did something that made the observing physicians gasp in disbelief. He pulled out a tangle of wires and circuits and began to work, his fingers moving with the practiced ease of someone who had spent his life fixing things that others had given up on. "I have been thinking," he said as he worked. "You can hear me. I know you can, but you cannot respond. That must be the worst part. Being trapped inside yourself with no way to reach out." The device he was building was crude by Verratti standards, a simple screen connected to sensors that could track eye movement. The kind of technology that human rehabilitation centers had been using for decades, but that the Verratti had dismissed as primitive and beneath their attention. "The way I figure it," Marcus said, adjusting the sensors with careful precision. "Your eyes still move a little. I noticed it when I was talking to you on the terrace. The way they tracked my hands when I gestured. The way they shifted when I mentioned the rain." He positioned the device in front of her and calibrated it with practiced movements. This is not going to fix you. I am not a doctor, and I do not pretend to understand what happened to your body. But this might let you talk, and talking is a start. The screen displayed a simple grid of letters and words, and the sensors waited patiently for input. Just look at what you want to say, Marcus explained. The sensors will track your eyes and translate it to text. It is not fast and it is not elegant, but it is something. The room fell absolutely silent. Even the physicians behind the glass stopped moving, their attention fixed on the princess as she stared at the screen with those 4 unblinking eyes. For a long moment, nothing happened, and Marcus felt doubt creeping into his heart. Maybe he had been wrong. Maybe she could not control her eyes at all. Maybe this was all just wishful thinking from a lonely mechanic who wanted to believe he could help. And then Salith's gaze moved, slowly, deliberately, with obvious effort, tracking across the grid to land on a single word. The screen displayed. Yes, Marcus let out a breath he had not realized he was holding, and his eyes filled with tears that he did not bother to hide. "You can hear me," he whispered. "You have been able to hear everything this whole time." Her eyes moved again, spelling out letters one by one with painstaking determination. "Your jokes are tirariguli," Marcus laughed, really laughed. The kind of laugh that comes from somewhere deep in the soul and refuses to be contained. He laughed until tears streamed down his face and his sides ached, and the physicians behind the glass stared at him like he had lost his mind. "Yeah," he managed to say between gasps of laughter. "Yeah, they really are. My crewmate Yara tells me that all the time, right before she throws things at my head." Salith's eyes moved again, and this time the message was longer. Each letter chosen with fierce concentration. "Thank you for seeing Mummy," and in that sterile white room surrounded by machines that had failed and physicians who had given up, something miraculous happened. Princess Salith Rakan reached out through 11 years of silence and touched another soul, and the universe would never be quite the same again. Marcus wiped his eyes and smiled at her with all the warmth a human heart could hold. "You are welcome, Princess, and for what it is worth, I see you just fine." The imperial court of the Verati Ascendancy was a nest of serpents wrapped in silk and starlight, and Marcus had learned quickly that not everyone celebrated the princess's breakthrough. There were those who had built their power on her silence, and they moved against him with the cold precision of predators who sensed their prey weakening. Lord Vathan Verkan was the Emperor's cousin and had positioned himself as heir to the throne for over a decade. He was tall and elegant with silver-white hair and 4 eyes that calculated every angle, and he smiled at Marcus with the kind of warmth that made the mechanic check for knives. "The human's methods are unorthodox," Vathan said smoothly during a council session that Marcus was forced to attend. "We cannot be certain that his presence is not causing neural contamination. Human brain patterns are known to be chaotic and unpredictable, and prolonged exposure could be damaging the princess further." Marcus opened his mouth to protest, but a warning glance from the Emperor's advisor silenced him. He was a guest here, barely tolerated, and speaking out of turn could cost him everything. "I propose that the human be removed from the princess's care immediately," Vathan continued, his voice dripping with false concern. "For her own protection. Of course, we can study his primitive technology and replicate his methods without the risk of continued human contact." The council murmured in agreement, and Marcus felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. They were going to take him away from Salith, going to silence her again just when she had finally found her voice. The charges came 3 days later. Espionage, cultural contamination, unauthorized access to imperial systems. They were false, every single one of them, but the evidence had been manufactured with expertise that spoke of power and resources, and Marcus found himself in restraints once again. "I am sorry," the guard who arrested him said quietly, and Marcus could see genuine regret in his 4 eyes. Many of us believe in what you have done, but Lord Vathan has allies everywhere, and his word carries weight that yours does not. They scheduled his deportation for the following morning. He would be sent back to the fringe colonies with a permanent ban from ascendancy space, and Salith would be alone again, trapped in silence with no one who saw her as anything more than a problem. But they had underestimated the princess. In her chambers, surrounded by physicians who spoke about her as if she were furniture, Salith had been practicing. Every spare moment, every ounce of concentration, every fragment of willpower focused on mastering the eye-tracking system that Marcus had built for her, now upgraded with Verati technology at her own insistence. She demanded to address the imperial court, and when the physicians tried to refuse, she spelled out a message that left no room for argument. I am still the princess, and you will obey me, or I will remember your names. They brought her to the great chamber where the council sat in judgment, where Lord Vathan smiled with the confidence of a man who had already won, where Marcus stood in chains waiting to be cast out of the only place where he had ever truly mattered. The massive holodisplay activated, and Salith's words appeared in letters 3 feet tall, visible to every being in the chamber. I have been in this room 10,000 TMs. The court fell silent. Even Lord Vathan's smile flickered as he realized something had changed, something he had not anticipated. I have heard every conversation, every plot, every whisper spoken, as though I were Fioranita Ruckus watched with tears in his eyes as the princess he had befriended fought back against 11 years of darkness. Her body remained frozen, but her spirit blazed with a fire that made the crystal chandeliers seem dim. Lord Vathan called my condition a convenient blessing 6 years ago. He has blocked 17. Treatment proposals, I remember every WRD. Color drained from Vathan's face, and he rose from his seat with desperate fury. This is manipulation. The human has corrupted her mind and is using her as a puppet to spread lies. You told Ambassador Kethris that my death would simplify succession. 3 years ago, in the garden by the fountain, you thought nitrogen monoxide one could hear lies. Vathan shouted, but his voice cracked and his eyes darted around the room, seeking allies who were suddenly very interested in looking elsewhere. The humans saw me when my own people did not. That is not espionage. That is humanide. The Emperor rose from his throne, and his gaze fixed on his cousin with a coldness that made the air itself seem to freeze. You blocked treatment proposals? His voice was quiet, but it carried through the chamber like a blade. Sire, I can explain. Vathan began, but the Emperor raised a hand and silence fell. My daughter has been trapped for 11 years, the Emperor said slowly. 11 years of suffering, 11 years of isolation, 11 years when she could hear everything we said about her without being able to respond. And you used that time to position yourself for power? The human gave me my voice back. He sat with me because I looked lonely. He talked to me because he believed I could hear. He built me a way to speak because he refused to give up. Salith's eyes moved to Marcus. And though her face could not change, he somehow felt her smile. He did what humans do. He cared about a stranger, and that is worth more than all the technology in the Ascendian's Wildlord. Vathan was arrested before the session ended. His eyes scattered like shadows before the dawn, and the charges against Marcus were dismissed with apologies that felt inadequate for what he had endured. The Emperor approached Marcus personally, and for the first time, the mechanic saw not a ruler, but a father, broken by guilt and overwhelmed by gratitude. You gave her back to me, the Emperor said, and his voice trembled with emotion he could not contain. I do not have words in any language to express what that means. Marcus looked at Salith, who was already spelling out another message on her display, something about how the Emperor was being dramatic, and how she had always been right there, if anyone had bothered to look. She gave herself back, Marcus said simply. I just gave her the tools. Everything else was her. 1 year had passed since a tired mechanic sat at the wrong table, and the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The Salith Institute for Neural Reclamation stood at the heart of Vareth Prime Station, a gleaming testament to what happened when human stubbornness met Varadi technology, and its doors were open to anyone who had been told they were beyond hope. Marcus Cole walked through those doors every morning, still wearing his mechanic's coveralls, still with grease under his fingernails, still looking exactly like what he was, a simple man who fixed things that others had given up on. The Institute had become famous across 12 systems. Human therapists worked alongside Varadi physicians, sharing knowledge that should have been shared centuries ago, combining approaches that neither species would have developed alone. The humans call it occupational therapy, Dr. Velana explained to a group of visiting dignitaries from the outer colonies. It is a radical concept, the idea that patients are people first and diagnoses second. That recovery involves the whole being rather than just the damaged parts. Marcus smiled as he passed the tour group. A year ago, those same dignitaries would have looked at him with contempt, but now they nodded with something approaching respect. He found Salith in her favorite spot by the viewport, her hover chair positioned perfectly to catch the light of the nebula that had witnessed their first meeting. Her eye-tracking system had been upgraded dozens of times and now connected directly to a voice synthesizer that gave her words sound, and her digital paintings had become famous across the Ascendancy. "You are late," her synthesized voice said, carrying a warmth that the technology somehow captured despite its artificial origins. "I have been waiting for 17 minutes, and I was beginning to think you had forgotten about me." Marcus dropped into the chair beside her with a dramatic sigh. "I could never forget about you. Princess, you would probably spell out something insulting on every display screen in the station just to remind me." "I would never do something so petty," Salith replied, and if her face could have smiled, Marcus knew it would have been grinning. "I would have the station I announce it over the public address system instead." They laughed together, and the sound of it echoed through the Institute like music. Patients looked up from their therapy sessions, physicians paused in their rounds, and everyone who heard it felt something shift in their hearts. The Terran Alliance wants to build sister institutes on 3 more stations, Marcus said, pulling out a datapad covered in official seals and important-looking signatures. "They're asking if I would be willing to help set them up." Salith's synthesizer hummed as she processed her response. "And what did you tell them?" "I told them I would have to ask my friend first," Marcus said simply. "I am not going anywhere unless you say it is okay." "Marcus." Salith's voice was gentle now, stripped of its teasing edge. "I am not going anywhere. I have an entire institute named after me, and a father who finally remembers that I exist. And more importantly, I have something to do with my mind besides going slowly insane from isolation." She paused, and when she spoke again, there was something deeper in her synthesized words. "You gave me back my life. Now go give that same gift to others who are still trapped the way I was." "You know," Marcus said, looking out at the nebula that seemed to pulse with ancient light, "when I sat down at your table, I was just tired and hungry and looking for somewhere to rest. I had no idea it would lead to all of this." "That is what I find most fascinating about humans," Salith replied. "You do extraordinary things without meaning to, simply because it does not occur to you to do otherwise. You saw a lonely stranger and decided to keep her company. And you changed the course of galactic history." Marcus shook his head with a small laugh. "I am not sure about galactic history. I just talk to you like a person." "Exactly," Salith said. "And that is something my own people failed to do for 11 years. All their technology, all their brilliance, all their resources. And not one of them thought to simply sit down and talk to me like I was still there." The Varadi Ascendancy had learned hard lessons from a human mechanic. Across 12 systems, attitudes toward disability were shifting, and patients who had been written off as hopeless were being re-evaluated with new eyes and new approaches. "My father asked me what I wanted for my birthday," Salus said suddenly. Do you know what I told him? Marcus raised an eyebrow. A new hover chair with racing modifications? I told him I wanted Earth Rain, Salus said softly. I want to know what it feels like, what it smells like, what it sounds like on a roof. I want to experience the thing you miss so much. The thing you talked about on that first day. Marcus felt tears prick in his eyes, the same tears that seemed to come so easily whenever Salith surprised him. You know, the Emperor probably has enough resources to simulate rain in any room you want. I do not want a simulation, Salith replied. I want to go to Earth. I want to see the planet that created you, the world that taught humans to care about strangers, the place that made you believe a broken princess was worth talking to. It is a long journey, Marcus said, but he was already smiling. And my ship is not exactly luxury class. Your ship is the ship of the man who saved me, Salith said. That makes it the finest vessel in the galaxy. They sat together as the nebula shifted through its endless dance. Two souls from different worlds who had found each other across an impossible distance. And in institutes and hospitals and homes across the Ascendancy, other souls were finding their way back from darkness because one human had refused to accept that anyone was truly beyond reach. The galaxy was learning what humanity had always known, that every broken machine might just need someone to talk to it, that loneliness was a wound no technology could heal, that the smallest kindness from the humblest hands could reshape the stars themselves. And in a universe that often seemed cold and uncaring, that was a lesson worth teaching, again and again, across every system and every species, until no one sat alone at an empty table ever again. Marcus Cole, the mechanic from the fringe colonies, looked at Princess Salith Vulcan, heir to the Ascendancy, and saw exactly what he had seen on that first day, a person worth knowing, a friend worth having, a soul worth saving. So, he said, grinning with all the warmth a human heart could hold, want to go see some rain? And her synthesized voice carried the smile her face could not show. I thought you would never ask.